So good afternoon, everyone. We'll allow the others to catch up with us, but in the meantime, I just wanted to say thank you very much for joining us. I'm Deborah Webster. I'm the chairperson of the MBN Next Gen program, and it's a real privilege to introduce this next panel, which will be moderated by Jean Gatt, and the other three panelists are also mentees from our Next Gen program. So I'm going to hand it over to Jean. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining in, first of all. So I'm just going to get right to the actual webinar, and I'll start off by saying we all know that human capital is the most valuable resource of the 21st century, and that, I mean, most of us have seen the EY study, which is quite worrying. That most of the youths in Malta, so around 70% of the youths in Malta, want to actually live and move and work abroad. And this is really worrying because it will cause a brain drain to Malta. And basically, we're just going to get right down to business and start off by, so in each of your own words, what are the main problems that Malta is facing, and why do you think so many youths want to leave Malta? I'll start off with Alex. Alex is the COO and co-founder of Inventory, a 3D printing company that has started out in Malta, and they focus on the whole process of 3D printing. Alex, what do you think are the main problems Malta is facing?
So honestly, I think the main problems right now is the lack of innovation culture in this country. No one wants to come up with new ideas, or on the contrary, they come up with the ideas, but then no one wants to actually go through with it. They want to stick in their comfort zone, they don't want to do anything that requires a lot of work and won't give them instant gratification. I think that is one of the biggest cultural issues we have at the moment.
Agreed. And I'll just jump on to you, Kristina, being the only Gen Z on the panel, and still a student at University of Malta. I know you're following a course in software development. You're very in touch with the Gen Z, generation. You go to university, you meet these students on a daily basis, you hear them complain. I mean, it's one of the main things we do. What do you believe? Why do you believe so many youths, especially Gen Zs, want to leave Malta?
I would say the main reasons are overdevelopment and lack of focus on sustainability. People are not fazed at all by constantly hearing construction from one of your neighbors, and that says a lot. And even just the amount of litter you see on the streets and fields shows you how people are just letting go of basic human responsibility. And just the fact that even people who do want to stay in Malta find it hard to speak about Malta patriotically, which is something very worrying.
Okay. And before I jump on to Steve, I do have one question for you. Are you part of that 70%? Do you consider yourself as part of that 70%? And if so, why?
I'd say yes, because it's one of my plans. But apart from the reasons I mentioned earlier, for me, particularly, it's the lack of opportunities since I want to become an actress. So there's currently no support for actors, or there aren't agents here that will help me get jobs, and they're all abroad. So that would be my reason.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Steve, I know, Steve, you come from a financial background, and now you're following your passion of becoming an entrepreneur. What is your take on the main problems in Malta?
Right, so Alexandra and Kristina both raised extremely good points. One of them definitely being the environmental degradation of this country. But one point I really wanted to focus on reading up to the panel debate was the identity of Maltese people, right? I do think that the world at this point in time, majority, within our generations, are currently going through an identity crisis. But I can't help but note that the sentiment of young people might be accelerating that crisis even more so. So I think at the moment there isn't that great sentiment and patriotic sentiment around Malta, which is driving us to look overseas. And I think that's not helping us tap into our core values and into our identity and to our culture, so on and so forth, which may keep us over here. So I do believe that identity is a big issue, which is lacking as a generation as a whole. But I think the sentiment in Malta is accelerating that even further.
Okay. Thank you. Just one last question before we jump on to possibly solutions, because we don't want to get bogged down on problems. So according to a recent study by the CAF, Malta dropped around 8 places in the World Giving Index. Do you guys believe that us as youths and also the Maltese population in general are losing their core values? We know that Maltese people have been very kind, persevere, are very humble usually, and are very creative as well. I mean, we have we might not showcase them as much, but we do have a lot of creative people in Malta. In your own opinion, do you guys think that we are losing our core values? I'll start off with you, Kristina.
I'd say kindness not as much, because if you look for it, I know many people who would be in their workplace and they go out of their way to show kindness towards you. I'd say perseverance and creativity, I do see it, like when you go even in the workplace or go shopping or just daily tasks, and you see people going about their day sort of on autopilot just to get through it for the sake of it, and kind of with blinders on, basically. But besides those values, I'd say the main value that we're losing is the value of responsibility, because we're the first to complain about issues, but then no one takes responsibility to actually make a difference.
Okay, that's very interesting. And you, Alex?
With respect to kindness, it's a very individual thing, but I believe that most people, rather than focusing on empathizing with the person, they would much rather judge them from their own little bubble, which is a big problem, because no one is willing to see if they actually need help. It's easier to judge from afar and just assume things about the person. With respect to perseverance, that bit depends on the passion of the person. Like, if you're not passionate about something, you are not going to be perseverant at all. So it all comes down to the individual as well. But I agree with Kristina about the responsibility. It takes a lot of effort to be responsible about things, and a lot of people try to bypass that responsibility.
Okay. And you, Steve, do you agree with like the responsibility being the one that is like getting lost, I would say?
Yes, I would definitely agree there. I think we have developed a degree of a blame culture in Malta, where none of us really like to remain accountable, and we're always kind of just waiting to see what's going to come from the top and how we can move ahead with it. Coming back to the other cultures, the other value sets, I did conduct a little experiment, and I won't get into too much detail here, and I won't blab on, so if I'm taking up time, please stop me. But I asked I had quite a large sample of people, and I asked them what they basically thought the core values were of Maltese people. Now, the sample of people actually ranged from foreign people to local people, all the different demographics, age groups, backgrounds, social classes, and so on and so forth. And one of the things I actually found, which was quite striking, was that the foreign people always had the better things to say about Malta as opposed to the Maltese people. Now that taps into my argument, right, about our identity and how we feel about ourselves, which was quite surprising. I wasn't expecting the best answers to come from foreign people. Then when I asked the Maltese people kind of like, what do you think, what do you guys think about Malta and the values of Maltese people, they actually struggled to answer even the first question. I was frequently kind of addressed with like condescending slurs or jokes here going on here and there, and it made me tap into whether or not Maltese people are actually in line with their values. So yes, I do think we've adopted a blame culture in Malta, where we're kind of laid back and we don't really take any initiative. And second of all, I do think that I do support my argument about the loss of identity and perseverance and so on.
Okay, thank you for that, Steve. So I don't want to get bogged down on the problems, because I mean we can continue being part of that like blame culture and just keep on not taking responsibility. So let's take responsibility and come up with some solutions and maybe smaller steps on how to get there. And I'll start off with education. So education is the core to everything, in my opinion. And recently, from the world's top 20 database, Malta's education as a whole ranks 55th in the world. And this puts us so far behind our European counterparts, who we try to consider ourselves with, such as Ireland, Sweden, Spain, Portugal, Estonia, who are all in the top quarter of this like 220 countries. And the main differences are the differences that Malta has is that they have a very low early child enrollment rate, which is less than 50%, and it's very worrying. If you compare this to Estonia, for example, Estonia has over 95%, and Estonia is at the 25th position. So the others are further up. And also access to internet, which is a very weird one considering how small Malta is and how easy it is to get access. Access to internet is only at 77%. And this is much more worrying, I would say, because I mean, we're so small. Internet is reachable from anywhere, even through cellular networks. So it's really, really worrying in my opinion. Starting off with you, Kristina, do you have any ideas on how we can improve the education system in Malta?
I'd say overall, I think there isn't a focus to aspire for progression and motivation and innovation from the bottom up. So from students and especially lecturers, like there isn't anyone enforcing or checking that educators are treating the lectures with the enthusiasm and encouraging students to push forward and become motivated, instead of just having that attitude of if a percentage pass, we're okay. Like with that attitude, we won't push forward. There's no one looking, or from what my experience, I don't see any look into what other universities are doing and pushing it so that we can be as good or better.
Okay. And I know that's like something you've also mentioned, and because I've spoken to you before, obviously, is that, for example, one of the issues you brought up is that we don't, like, you're at university, and when you applied for your course of software development, you just had to conform with a certain amount of modules, and you didn't have that flexibility from the university as well. But I know that you, and it's known, like abroad, there are courses which are very, very, very flexible. So you choose your modules and you basically define where you want to go. Basically, it makes the module or the course you're following much more creative at the end of the day, trying to push you to become much more creative. Do you think that this should be a system that we should apply to Malta, in your opinion?
Yes, I know many students, like just in my course alone, who would want to take other units from different courses, or who feel very stressed out because we have a limited amount of time to get a limited amount of ECTs covered. And for example, okay, if you fail 3 units, you have either the option to repeat the entire year and sit for even the units that you already passed, or else take up those 3 units on top of the units of next year, which makes it even tougher. So there isn't anything that's a safety net for the student to feel comfortable actually exploring and learning.
Okay. I'll jump on to you, Steve. I know you studied ACCA, but you probably have some ideas on how the education system can be improved.
Yeah, so definitely I want to go to the lowest stages of education, right, in the primary sections and the primary and secondary sections, right? So for me, I think our generation kind of are on those type of parenthood, right? And from what I reckon and what I see and what I hear from people is, directly from teachers, is that, I think teachers need to be held up in a higher light. I think they need to be respected more for their position. Now, my take is that obviously teachers form they form quite a solid foundation for future growth of younger generations, and they actually influence them quite a lot. At the end of the day, your kids are more probably with your teachers than they are with you. So it's vitally important that the teachers are up for the challenge, and that they are suitable to take on such a responsibility. Having said that, I think we could probably subsidize and incentivize teachers more than they currently are, and that would allow schools perhaps to be a bit more picky with who they select to teach children, right? So I think from the lower ends, there is a lot of work to be done. And even for, it needs to be two-sided. So you can't just point at the school and say, you need to do this. It needs to come from a cultural change from our generation, right? Once we have our children, we need to kind of respect and become more educated on the position and the responsibilities of teachers. We let them do their job the best they can without any interference from our end. I mean, in terms of ACCA, it's a very strict modular course, so there's not really much leeway I could go through with my studies, so I won't comment on that.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And Alex, to end off with you for this question, how do you think maybe one or two ways on how the education system can be improved, especially knowing that you have kids and your kids are going to probably pass through the education system?
I think we need to give credit where credit is due, honestly, because the education system has improved so much, especially from the time that I started university. Like, when I started, it wasn't that long ago, maybe 10 years ago, there weren't that many creative options. Like when I started, there wasn't an option for graphic design, which is something I would have pursued if it was an option at the time. But now there are so many different creative courses. There's also the Edward de Bono Institute, which allows you to study for creativity and innovation. So we are working towards having a more creative country, But the issue, I would say, is more the mindset than anything else. Like, you can have excellent teachers and an excellent educational system, but if you don't care about it, if you're the student and you just don't care, there's not so much that you can do. That has to come from you, not from the educational system. It has to come from the family. It has to come from the core values which are being instilled in the child as well. With respect to early childhood enrollment rates, it's true that we have this cultural idea that when children are young, they're better off at home with the mom, usually specifically the mom, not even the dad, because apparently it's cruel to send them to childcare. Now, from my end, I have sent all three of my kids to childcare at a young age, like from 1 to 2, and they improved so much. You see their intelligence just bursting when you send them to childcare. They improve in leaps and bounds. So it's more of the mindset, it has to come from the individual.
Okay. So, and one thing we mentioned at the beginning was that we seem to lack creativity in Malta. And I know that most students, there isn't a study on this like per se, but most students finish their tertiary education and they just go into a job and they just continue in that cycle. In other countries, it's very normal for students to take a gap year. So they would take a gap year, or they would, it's very normal that they would go on either even internships abroad. It's very, very normal. You can speak to students in Malta. You see them online and everything. Do you believe that universities, the whole education system, parents should incentivize like plans to push people to go for either gap years or even like for internships abroad? I'll start off with you, Kristina, because I know that you soon finish your course, so maybe it will affect you directly.
No, I believe this should be incentivized. And even, for example, currently there is Discover You, which some of my friends have gone on, and it's literally a program where you can they fund your transport and accommodation, and you can go and you can visit different countries in Europe. And the feedback and the change that these people go through it's very notable. And there should be more of opportunities like this, and not just abroad, even opportunities where you can have a program for a gap year here and learn new things, maybe even shadow different jobs and get a different experience to just cementing yourself into one job straight away.
Okay. One question to all you guys. Have you ever been on Erasmus? Or
Yes, I have.
Okay. So I'll jump on to you, Alex.
Okay.
How has this helped you? Do you believe, like, in the long run,
Well, I spent 3 months in Krakow studying pharmacy, and I do believe it helped me so much as an individual. More with respect to the fact that I saw a lot of different things, the educational system there, or at least the work that was done there, was completely different to the work that was provided in Malta. And it also helped me on an individual level, just being alone essentially in the real world, alone in the real world, having to fend for yourself. It really is an important experience that most people need to go through. But in my time, I'm saying this as if it was like a long time ago, it was heavily, people were encouraged to go for Erasmus. I can speak for my own course, where they talked to us about it in depth and told us that everyone of this in this room has to go on Erasmus, and maybe 30 out of 40 people went.
Okay.
So it was heavily pushed on us back then. With respect to the gap year, again, I think that depends more on the individual. And I honestly believe that if you want to take a gap year, maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but I think that should come out of your own pockets rather than being incentivized.
Okay, more than incentivized with only money, though. I was even actually like incentivizing with like, you'd go and do like an internship abroad, and then take like 6 months gap from, like, if you have a whole year, you take 6 months work and 6 months gap. So, but I get where you're coming from. One thing I know is that, like, for when you come to do a master's in Malta, obviously you have to pay. And most of the students who do a master's, I mean, they do have their own pockets. There's the get qualified, obviously, but they still have to pay upfront. But besides masters and PhDs, the rest of the education system is free, from the primary, secondary, tertiary, and even the pre-primary, basically the childcare and all that stuff. Do you think that the education system being free impacts the whole education experience negatively? Because we seem to have that ouïa mentality. So that's a mentality where you say, because it's free, we just send our students to school. But maybe not everyone's made to fit into that pocket of, hey, you go to university. Someone might be made to go to actually work, Steve, do you have any idea about this? Like, do you have any opinion?
No, I think education is definitely a necessity for the benefit of the public of Malta. I don't think that it should instill a level of ouïa mentality. So from the previous argument, what I said was the sort of importance we place on teachers in raising core values within children of the future, and that's why they play such an important part within our society. Rather than having, I think this ouïa mentality is more deep and more intertwined and more confusing to understand. It's something which evolves over time, right? But I think I don't agree with this the ouïa mentality coming out from school and taking away the opportunity to learn is not to the benefit of the country. So I think what we should be doing is definitely encouraging education at all costs, regardless of whether we pay for it. And second of all, I think the importance would need to once again go back to the teachers who take up quite a big initiative in raising the children and giving them the ability and thought to be creative thinkers, to be open-minded, and so on.
Okay. And how would you encourage people to become more creative? It's a huge problem, we just seem to be recycling the same old ideas, and so maybe you can give some insight.
There's actually quite a lot. So one of the questions you brought up in the previous question regarding a gap year, yes, it is definitely something which should be encouraged more than incentivized. So I think it's becoming more accepted within our culture. So us, when we find ourselves in parenthood, I think we'd be more willing and more open to allow our kids to go on a gap year and venture onto their own journey. So I think a person, when they want to take a gap year, I think they should do so at a later stage. And the reason that is because they'll have more experience about what they like and what they don't like. If they do a gap year prematurely, they might not really kind of benefit as much as they would should they delay the period, the process, right, and the period. But gap years are definitely a way in which people could find themselves being creative. And second of all, just throw yourself at every opportunity you have to make something creative. If you kind of sideline throughout life, forget you ever kind of understanding what you want. Whatever opportunity there is to do something different, be it paid or unpaid, just do it. You'll open up your doors pretty openly, and that will obviously add to your creative palette as you grow older.
Okay. And Kristina, I know you want to become an artist, so that requires quite a lot of creativity. And not everyone's made to be creative. Some are made to be more mathematical, for example, and some people are made to be more creative. You seem to be more on the creative side. Do you have any ideas on how we can push people to become more creative, or even students?
I think it is that. I think it's encouraging people to learn and try everything that they can. Every opportunity they get, they go for it. And of course, keeping on the right track. But if you stay in one lane and you don't explore and you don't learn, you can't get inspired. So that would be it.
Okay. So let me jump on to something else, and it's mainly related to employment. So obviously everyone has to have a job, everyone has to have some income coming in, and something this is my opinion, something I seem to look at is that Malta seems to always attract the same type of industries, let's put it that way. And it is what most universities end up doing out of most students end up doing out of university. According to you, Steve, what is like one interesting industry that Malta can attract that can, get us back closer to our core values? You're muted, Steve.
Yeah, so I've had some time to think about this. I'm going back and forth to different people and trying to explore. But one really interesting thing which always seemed to come up was that Malta should really be focusing on renewables, right? And then becoming a fully sustained renewable country. And the reason that is because we are an island nation, we are limited resources, we are very, very dependent on imports and so on. And there are some industries, even agriculture, if you like, which are being completely neglected at a very important time in history, if you ask me. So, for example, I'll get into it later on. I think we've seen supply chains come under pressure big time because of all the world conflict, right? So we need to ensure that industries which we can push forward are ones which will make Malta self-sustainable and independent, regardless of the situation the world ever ends up being in the future. And so on. So those, for me, it's a sustainability, ESG, and even agriculture as well, which is, I think, incredibly important.
Okay, thanks for that. And you, Alex, what's one industry not only attract but also like incentivize people to go into, or even like to research into?
Honestly, I think it makes more sense to focus on the local industries, because our government has a tendency to focus on foreign talent, which is a shame because we do have the local talent here. We definitely do. It's just that they're more willing to invest in companies that are well established rather than companies that do the exact same thing locally, which are just as talented, are just as good, but they haven't been around as long.
Okay. And I know you have a 3D, like you have a whole 3D printing company that takes it from start to finish. But do you find it hard to find people in terms of, hey, you might need specialized skills? Do you find it hard to find people from straight out of university, for example, or straight out from MCAST or from a course to employ for specialized jobs?
Honestly, we don't find it that hard. Like whenever we release a call for internships or for work, we are bombarded with applications. Usually we go towards more creative students or engineering students. Regardless of this, we still have to train them on the site, because what we do here is not something that can be taught in university. It's taught by us, the experts. So the training will all be done here when they start.
Okay. And jumping on to Kristina. So you probably heard that, in 2018, Malta wanted to become a blockchain island. This is an example. And basically, when we started attracting companies to Malta, 2 years later, we had released a course at university. So we first attracted companies to Malta and then, released a course at university. So we're a bit far behind. To attract and hopefully create, not only attract, and even like look in Malta and say, hey, like, where do I want to go in terms of my ideas? How can we make sure our education system is well adapted for any innovative industries we want to create and attract?
On that, I would say more incentives for educators, on the same as we've previously said, sort of to get more people, because we have people in these industries that are passionate about what they do, but we don't have the courses currently because people aren't going to leave the job that's providing well for them to go for something that isn't going to provide as much. There aren't incentives to push people towards actually educating. So that would be it.
Okay, that's really good actually. I didn't think of that, but it's the truth. So I'll jump on to something that's quite big as well. Awareness and connection between Maltese people, Maltese companies, and everything. So I know that, I mean, Alex, you're the co-founder of Inventory, like I said before, and basically that you find it quite hard to find support. There isn't really a startup scene in Malta, and most of the entities there are, they tend to focus on, pulling foreign investment, getting foreign countries. How could the local startup scene be further improved and even supported?
We need better connections. Now, there are many incentives on how to get funding, but I do believe that there needs to be more of a push on this because it is still very difficult to acquire funding in time. Like most startups, it's a very dynamic job and things change so quickly. And the actual funding process might take a bit longer than it should. Apart from that, we need more connections with actual businesses. So I do believe it would help if they could provide connections with businesses or incentivize businesses to work with startups as opposed to working with big corporate companies already.
Okay. And do you have an idea in mind on how that can be done? I mean, maybe like I don't know, an incubator, or like whereby all the startups are brought together, or they have like a meeting place and they do weekly events. Do you have like just one idea that comes off the top of your head?
There's already many of those which exist. Like we're part of the Malta Chamber, which is a big connection. There's also Basement the Boardroom by First Bridge, which works to bring all the startups together so you can actually connect with like-minded people and build work relationships like that. So it is improving. Over the past couple of years, the startup community has grown and expanded locally.
Okay. That's good to know, at least, and jumping on to you, Steve. I mean, there seems to be, and this is my opinion as well, there seems to be a lack of connection between people rather than just startups only. We're such a small island, though at the same time we might find it's quite hard to network with like-minded people or speak about intelligent topics and everything. And I know there are quite a few events out there. How could we improve the connection in Malta? Do you believe, like, through between people rather than just companies? Because at the end of the day, companies are made out of people.
Yeah, no, at the end of the day, I think it always boils down to the mentality of the general public, right? In Malta, I think that we kind of sideline and wait for things to be thrown at us, and then we react. So we're a reactive nation rather than a proactive nation. And second of all, I think the only way we can change that is if we get communities going, very well-established communities which are fully engaged. Because realistically, Jean, it's very difficult for a small group of select people to even prompt change. We all know that it needs to be quite monumental. It has to be quite a movement to deliver change on this in this country. So, if there is no predetermined motive that makes sense and people aren't engaged in it, it'd be very, very hard to derive change. So I think it's just a matter of starting to shift the culture within Malta and starting to realize that if we want, to move change, it needs to come more from the bottom up rather than us sitting pretty and waiting for directions to come from the top.
Okay, and if you have to come up with one idea, like one action point from that, I mean, saying like, that we need to shift from bottom up is a big thing, but one idea that can start to affect that.
Yeah, I mean, for example, this was a really good one. I think the MBN had really hit the nail on the head here, offering a mentoring program and obviously delivering angle to a lot of young people and seeing how things are done across to what, they're delivering like a different angle to what we're normally used to, right? So it opens our perspectives, it opens our ideas, our creativity, and we'll probably take a lot from this, go forward and start to initiate things on our own without waiting to be given any directive.
Okay. So like basically being part of these programs that are available.
Absolutely.
Super. I'll jump on to another important aspect, and it's environment. I mean, like you said, Kristina, sustainability and the environment is super important. Being surrounded by a good environment is key. And in 2017, for example, the Energy and Water Government Agency of Malta announced its plan to have at least half of the renewable energy, half of the island's requirements for energy from renewable sources. 2002 came. All right, there was COVID, and there was quite a few. It's a very hard goal to achieve. Like in 3 years, they said in 3 years we want to achieve 50% of the renewable energy by solar from solar energy. 2002 came along, and we're very short of this, with only 7.7% of the island's energy being from renewable sources. The funny thing is we have we have 2,000 hours of sunshine a year, and only around 7% of our days in the year where we have no wind, so it's calm days. So we should be utilizing like solar and wind energy heavily. Besides subsidies from the government, because usually most people just end up like getting solar for their house because there are subsidies on them. Is there a way on how to educate or push people and even governments to achieve like a higher percentage of renewable energy sources? I'll start with you, Kristina, because I know that you love sustainability.
No, because with this, even back in 2012, there was a Renewable and Island Global Summit held in Malta. It was a global summit, so a bunch of other countries came, and they planned to generate 10% of all consumed energy from all alternative sources by 2020. And so that was back in 2012, and 10 years didn't get us to meet these goals. So we talk as if and plan in the right direction, but then there isn't anything enforcing that these milestones are met. There isn't transparency in an action plan or in how it's going, basically from the project management side of it, because if clearly we didn't meet those goals, then there's something going wrong in the execution. So agreed. I think it's actually having someone push and see that, okay, if a milestone isn't met, why, and let's fix it, not just keep it going.
Basically having retrospectives on why this was not met, and usually it's probably they keep on going. Like you said, in 2012 they said by 2020, and then in 2017 they said 50% by 2020, and now it's 2022 and we're still at 7%. So it's quite a low number. And what we know as well is that Malta's far from self-sustainable. We have a trade deficit of around 3 billion. Between the year of 2020 and 2021, this increased by 1 billion, which is 30%. That's big. We import most of our foods and vegetables from other European states. If a conflict arises, which is possible, let's be honest. I mean, now we're not living like in Fairland. We would be in a very bad state. If you think about it, Steve, how can this be combated, and how can we become more self-sustainable?
Yeah, no. So, I mean, just to give some context, I think, not context, it's, it's well studied that we know that climate change is going to probably have some impact on our lives either now or in the future. So something needs to be done, whether we like it or not. So, I mean, one of the statistics I had read about is that I think climate change is expected to generate about 200 million refugees, as opposed to the 10 million we're currently experiencing from the Ukrainian conflict. So put that into perspective, it will be a massive drain on resources, and we don't want to be in a reactive state for that. We need to ensure that this country is self-sustainable, right? We need to ensure that if things hit the fan and supply chains are even more impacted through global conflict, global warming, so on and so forth, what can we do to ensure that the bare minimum can be supplied to the people, right? Because then you're pushed onto the ropes and we don't know what's going to happen. Now, I go back to my point of agriculture, right? That is something that's a bare necessity, right? We should not be able to be in a position to keep on developing onto our ODZ land and extrapolating more and more usage out of our land for the purpose of construction and development. Like, there's a fine line between kind of prosperity and environmental degradation, and the environment is something we really need to secure and need to treasure, especially if something something goes wrong in the future. So yes, I think sustainability should be top on the agenda. Same with energy, right? We're always dependent on foreigners and LNG gas tanks. Why aren't we moving towards more of a solar-based country where each house becomes its own decentralized grid of energy? You know, we can use battery packs and solar panels and start to increase the level of subsidies. The hundreds of millions which are spent on the power station need to kind of be reassessed, I think, and on the tanker need to be reassessed, and we need to start moving away from dependencies on foreign countries, in my opinion, for the purpose of sustainability.
Okay, so basically it's investing in more sustainable energy instead of just investing in like
yes, and
tanker.
making sure to preservation of land should be high on the agenda, and education around the importance of agriculture needs to be made clear.
Okay. Kristina, you had said something important before. Sort of we were talking about gap years. You said like instead of promoting gap years abroad, you can even promote kind of a gap year or like an internship for the local scene. Do you think that if there is some form of incentive for students to go towards more sustainable roles, like such as we're mentioning that Malta has a huge trade deficit in terms of food and vegetables. What if like students were incentivized to take like, I don't know, 2-3 months off and go on a local farm to actually help and, you know, understand that how little we're producing compared to our usage, and find out more and research more in actual fact? Do you think that would be a good idea? Or
I think so. I would also pair it though with not just that one job. I would put it so that maybe a month at that job, another month at something else, even if they're all towards sustainability, because I think it would be more encouraging for people, even people who just don't know what, aren't sure about the career line they want to choose, to get a full view of all of the options, kind of, or some of the options rather than just one.
Okay, interesting. And Alex, I'm gonna end this part with you. So I know that recently Malta Enterprise allocated around 5 million of their budget to an ESG fund, and knowing that, you know, you're the co-founder of a company, basically, have you tried to plan for eventually to become more ESG compliant? And if not, do you plan on becoming more self-sustainable or carbon neutral?
Of course. Sustainability is very important, especially to us. We get asked this question a lot, like, how are you implementing sustainability as a plastics manufacturer? Well, the truth is that we are trying to do this with the material choice that we have. So we try to purchase more carbon positive filament as opposed to carbon negative ones. Even the packaging that the material comes in, it's recyclable. Apart from that, it is in the process itself. Like when we are designing something for 3D printing, we design it in such a way that it has no waste products. So there is no extra plastic being removed into the world, you know. Apart from that, we are trying to work with people who will get us to the point where we can actually reuse the leftover filament. Unfortunately, this is something that is not done locally. There was a startup that was trying to do it a couple of years back, but I don't think they received enough funding. So hopefully down the line, we will be able to collaborate with someone like this to minimize our waste further and further. Apart from this, there's also a yearly Smart and Sustainable Business Awards. So the government is already incentivizing it. And we have actually applied for this award, and we managed to come third in it. So I'm assuming we're on the right track so far. This is great.
Well done with that. And like you said,
you.
You know, I mean, most of the startups don't end up getting funded. I mean, that's a very interesting startup you just mentioned there, which probably has just died out because it didn't have enough funding. So like, I think what this ends up with is like, hey, there needs to be much more awareness from a local startup point of view, and also looking locally just rather than abroad, you know, from the people in power. And I'm going to jump onto infrastructure now. Infrastructure is the number one way to get around. To have a country moving forward, you need to have good infrastructure. And we know that Malta's infrastructure is far from ideal, let's be honest. It's not easy to move around. Steve, do you have any ideas on how the Maltese infrastructure can be improved? Because we always seems to be focusing on, the big picture, such as an underground, which will take loads of time. But I'm sure there are shorter term goals which Malta can achieve to improve.
Absolutely. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you there. Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
don't
I think I think there are a lot of like low-hanging fruit that Maltese people are completely neglecting, and always looking for the bigger picture. And the underground is a good example of that. First of all, I don't even know if we'll have enough traffic going through for it to even be feasible. But a low-hanging fruit, for example, would be simply to increase the infrastructure around bike lanes. I mean, we're coming to a point where bikes are being battery-powered, scooters are all over the place. These things are probably going to be used by our generation more and more. Like, I mean, I'm not expecting a 70-year-old to hop onto a scooter or a bike. I mean, if they do, great. But they need to start. We need to start making the right infrastructure moves and start to plan our infrastructure around these innovative and these new means of transport.
Okay. And basically, so we need to have more. Like it's Malta so small, so we basically just need to connect Malta in a better way rather than just
Absolutely.
roads and focusing on roads.
Yeah.
And do you agree with that, Kristina? I don't know where you live and how far it is for you to get to university, but I know it's a huge problem park at university.
I live in Malleha.
Okay.
So right now I had to get a car because I've been using public transport and it was not feasible at all. I have to wake up at 5 a.m. to leave at 6:30 to actually get there in time for my 8 o'clock lecture. It's not feasible. But to be fair on this, because I had spent 6 months in Belgium on Erasmus, and there it's constantly bikes, and it's amazing how they still have space, as in even with the small space they have, they still made it work. So the bike lanes aren't on the streets where cars can come and run you over. And I think it's a matter of safety, because I would use an electric bike to get to uni if I felt safe enough to do so. And this would also talk up to how drivers drive in Malta. So possibility of follow-up drivers tests that are free and mandatory after a certain amount of years to actually make sure people are still following the rules as much as possible, of course. And as well, there was this thing in Belgium where the city centres, cars can't pass through them on Sundays only, but just the small city centres where you can just go by walk anyway. And as well, there are some cities where they're split into 4 and you can't pass through the different sectors. You'd have to go out and around and to exit and enter it. So it becomes more convenient to just grab a bike.
Or walking.
So exactly, making using cars not worth the hassle, sort of.
Okay, I get it. And we've seen it quite, like it's a very big study abroad. I mean, most of the cities just make it so difficult to use cars that it will end up being more efficient to use a bike or walking. All right. Now, before we conclude, because we're coming up to the hour mark, there is a question from David Walsh that we want to answer, basically, and basically it's and I'll start maybe with you, Alex. So there has been a number of issues raised around corruption in Malta, and even in the EY study it showed that besides overdevelopment, corruption was the second reason why youth want to leave. Do you think that this is being over exaggerated, or do you feel that this is still very much everyone's mind and still a concern for us from the younger generation?
I don't think it's been over-exaggerated at all. In all honesty, I believe that locally, people prefer to just sweep it under the carpet and ignore it, as long as they're getting something out of it. So I think we should have more focus on it and more focus on trying to remedy it, rather than ignoring the issue at hand.
Okay. And Steve, what do you think about this?
So basically, going back to the first question we went through, basically when I was highlighting the identity crisis of young Maltese people and why they're so adamant to leave this country. As I've said, I kind of prompted the question when I was testing my sample and the people I was utilizing for my little study. And I asked them, so do you guys think that Malta is kind of a shady country? Would that prompt you to leave? And more often than not, the foreign portion of the sample definitely said, yeah, you guys have built quite a shady reputation around you. But the last, the Maltese people, as I've mentioned before, they couldn't even give me a value or a reason. And most of the time, when I asked them, like, hey, what do you guys think about the values of Maltese people? They kind of gave me, those condescending slares and said, Mela, we have values here, which speaks a lot of volume. And that all ties into the stories which are probably being published by the media, and the stories which now form part of a time in history of Malta. The past 10 to 15 years, for 5 to 10 years, have been quite all over the place in that respect. So that definitely may leave a stain on the perception of Malta, and why maybe young people want to leave so much.
Okay, and what more can be done, do you think, or what more should be done, not only from the people high up, but also us? What more can be done to improve the state? Or I mean, corruption is everywhere. Like I mean, in Malta, I see it. So, what more can be done, in your opinion?
Yeah, so coming back to it, obviously, one thing I will acknowledge is that most of the foreigners had said that, you guys' problems are quite minuscule compared to what we're witnessing back home. So everyone has their own story to tell, and everyone comes from that background. But one thing we can do is basically have a bottom-up approach, and it needs to come from our age, right? It needs to come from our generation, right, or from many people. Because realistically, it's more likely that change will be derived from 1,000 people rather than 15 people on the top. So the bottom need to come together and collaborate and understand what is being done wrongly, and then take it up to the top table and then make room for change. Because if there's no greater purpose for the bottom half to pursue, then there'll never be any there will never be a motive to aspire to do better for this country. So until we fix on what's happening at the bottom, then there's no point going up to the top and taking it forward.
Okay. And Kristina, you're at university, so you probably, like I said, you speak to other students. You're more in touch with the students and Gen Z generation. What do you think about this?
I think people are starting to feel a bit hopeless, and it's hard because even, for example, smaller projects, like I had research into land reclamation, and there was a project to reclaim land a few years back, and I don't know where that ended up, but I had done research. Media does not say the same thing. Different sites have completely different stories. I had meetings and I created a petition. Like, all right, people trying to make a change. Then there's like this brick wall where you speak to educators to create a program to raise awareness, and you have meetings with different people, and then you just don't see anyone follow through or take ownership, and you're just there alone and you don't know what to do, and you just stop. It's like, I get a bit ick about it, because it's something that's really hard, because if you don't,
it's frustrating.
Exactly, it's frustrating.
I think we just need a bit of a voice, really, and to project that voice and make it heard. And then once we have that, then we're in a position to kind of aspire to do better things. But I think one thing that could come out of this is we try to establish that voice of the younger generations and what we want, because realistically we're here for, I mean not a touch wood, but we've got more to lose than perhaps the people on top who have been here for 60, 70 years. And that needs to be addressed. I'm not trying to say that in any demeaning way, but it's we have what to fight for, I guess.
Exactly, just to keep pushing and do everything you can to make things go into a better direction.
All right. Thank you for that, guys. We also have another question. And basically, I'll start off with you, Alex. If you have to pinpoint one thing that can be changed in order to keep the next generation of entrepreneurs here and become like the idea of the local startup space or the entrepreneurship, and what we can promote to the younger generation, basically, what would it be?
I would say it would be would need more of a push on innovative technologies, or innovative practices. Because locally we have this mentality where if it's not broken, you don't need to fix it. It doesn't need refinement. But if you can invest in something which is more innovative, which will allow you to do the job faster, which will require less manpower, why not invest in it?
True. And from your end, Steve, what do you think would be?
I think it's diversity. I mean, I think Malta as such. So listen, the three main industries I'd say in Malta which generate the most income are financial services, gaming, and tourism and construction. We'll basket those together. For the younger generation and for younger people to then start to understand what opportunities there are open to them, they kind of need to be exposed to diversity. They need to be exposed to different ideas, different everything. If younger people are always going to be projected with, you should become an accountant, you should become a lawyer, you should become whatever, then it's very hard to stipulate. It's very hard to generate creativity at very young ages. All people see at very young ages: financial services, hospitality, so on and so forth. So to have a greater diversity and to give the smaller companies, the innovative companies, a voice might really help to change this norm, the current culture we have, and to accelerate innovation, I'd say, and ideas.
Okay. So mainly it's like maybe it's even more awareness on the different type of industries that are out there, because we seem to always be focusing on those 3-4 industries, but there are quite a few companies out there.
Yeah.
Sorry,
just
go ahead.
the last point I'd make is that I think we can't. It's also a good idea for us to kind of lean off those 4, maybe financial services as much, and the reason that being is there may be a position, there may be a time where taxes harmonize, and that might really impact the future businesses of Malta. So we need to make sure that we kind of start I think not an exit strategy, but start releasing some reliance on those 3-4 pillars of economic generation we have on the island.
Diversification.
Absolutely.
Super. So we've come up to the hour mark, and I'm going to start concluding basically. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for joining, and also like to thank the panelists. To conclude, I'd like to say that from our end, I think we can say that it has been a really good call. We kind of come up with quite a few points, and I think the main takeaways from this is that, hey, there needs to be more awareness on the local startup scene and the local industries. There needs to be more innovative ideas, and the push for innovative ideas. There needs to be more focus on on becoming more self-sustainable and sustainability in general, and hopefully, like, I don't know, a cleaner environment and a more helping hand environment from everyone. Finally, I'd like to say thank you to Deb and everyone at the Malta Business Network from my end. We're coming up to the end of the program and it's been a really good program. And honestly, I would recommend it to anyone who wants to jump into finding yourself more basically, and finding someone who can possibly give you more connections, because that's what it basically is. They're a group of connections, and I think it's been incredible for all of us. I think I can speak for Kristina, Alex, myself, Steve. So thank you once again.
Thank you for having me.
Really enjoyed
Yes,
that.
thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.